Hey, good afternoon, everyone from Madison, Wisconsin. I'm Molly Immendorf, the Instructional Technologist from eXtension. I'm so happy to welcome you to today's session, What's New with Story Maps. This session is part of eXtension's Impact Collaborative. The Impact Collaborative is a proven process that's been developed by eXtension to catalyze, accelerate, and amplify local impact. As the co-host, I'll be watching Q&A and chat if you have any questions and comments. I'm pleased to introduce today's presenter, Shane Bradt. Shane is the Geospatial Extension Specialist from University of New Hampshire. He's been involved in eXtension through the eXtension Geospatial community since 2006. And with that, I'll turn it over to Shane.
So thank you very much for setting this up and for inviting me to present a bit on how story maps can be used and talking a little bit about new advancements in story mapping. If you've been paying attention to eXtension or to the work that I do or other folks do in cooperative extension related to geospatial technologies, you'll have seen that we've been doing quite a bit on story maps in the not too distant past. And that's really because we think that a lot of people in cooperative extension are very interested in telling stories effectively. And from a geospatial technology or mapping standpoint, perhaps we're a bit biased, but we feel that there's a pretty big role for stories were related to maps. So there are several webinars we've had in the past, including ArcGIS Online in general and story maps. But the idea behind this one was to give an update, maybe what's a bit new with story maps. And I'm approaching it from two perspectives. One, what's new with story maps from the standpoint of its use in cooperative extension. And so I'm going to show a couple of examples of the way story maps and mapping have been used to tell stories and engage with audiences here in New Hampshire. And then, so what are some of the new features that have occurred in story maps as of recent, which allow the story maps to be that much more engaging or more useful. And so there's lots and lots of different types of these, but I decided to focus on, for this, 3 specific examples of how maps are being used in cooperative extension here in New Hampshire, and then also 3 examples of new approaches that are helping maps and story maps to be even more engaging. So, okay. All set with seeing my screen?
I am. We are seeing your Zoom client.
How do I get rid of that?
I think you can just close it. I don't think it'll knock you off Zoom if you just want to close that. In fact, I'm 99.9% sure it won't. But yeah, let's just minimize it instead.
Did I? Can you? Yes. So is it good?
Yeah.
You don't see the bar in the bottom, do you?
No.
Okay. Good. Okay, great. So I'll just get this out of the way a little bit. Great. So just as a brief overview of story maps before we get started, for some folks this may be a review, but for others this may be the first time they're hearing about story maps, is that why you really need something along the lines of story maps is that even though maps are interesting and tell a story to some extent, often you, as the user of a map, have a lot more information about what that map is supposed to be showing. So, for example, a lot of people think, this is great, we'll have our interactive data on the map, everybody will come to our website, they'll look at it, then they'll explore, but they don't think necessarily about how do I get the information on the map to tell a story, or how do I get people who are interested in finding out information, how do I guide them through a process of discovering the correct information? And often people just take a whole bunch of points, they'll throw them on the map, and you'll start to try to hope that people will zoom in, zoom out, and click. I found, generally speaking, even people use maps a lot. Just having some points on the map usually isn't enough unless it's a very simple map. So story maps were designed to try to lead people through the process of understanding how you can create a narrative that will guide people through your specific story. And I will say that the story maps we're talking about are from a company called Esri, which is one of the biggest GIS companies in the world. There are a variety of ways you can create story maps. There are 2 specific account types that we'll talk about later. One of them is free and anybody can get, and the other one is a paid version, but almost every university has some sort of account already. We'll say most of the things we're talking about today can be accomplished with the free version. There's one or two things that the paid version is required for, but most story maps and most storytelling with maps can be done without that. Also, just to note, story maps themselves are open source, and if you have your own server and you're comfortable with doing a bit of behind-the-scenes coding, you can grab the template right from Esri and run them on your own. So they are tied specifically to the Esri platform. If you're just a user who wants to log in and create your maps, you don't have to do anything on your own, set up anything. It can all be done on their servers. But if you want to have on your server or you want to customize it, you're allowed to do that as well. And as I said, it is an open source, the actual format of story maps. Now, the idea, again, behind story maps is that you would like to design this multimedia experience, which is not just based on a single map. You'd like to have a map and a legend, perhaps, but also you'd like to have graphics and links out to other information and text and have people be guided through a narrative. And again, this is what story maps are particularly well designed to do. This is one example that I use often, this Connecticut Changing Landscape, and part of the reason I use it is I happen to know the people who created it, but also because it's a really good example of the way in which maps can be used to tell stories. And in fact, this was awarded a few years ago the top prize for educational use of story maps. But before we get too far into a specific type, I just want to say that there's lots of different types of story map templates that exist. Over time, new story map templates are being created. And often, again, it's thought of from the standpoint of, I am a user of maps. I'd like to make a cool interactive way to present them, but I have no coding experience. I don't have my own server. I don't have access to any of these things. Story maps are then for you. There's no assumption that you know anything other than just being able to get your data up into the mapping system, which is ArcGIS Online, and then being able to use templates to create and stitch together your story. I will say from experience that, of course, one of the more important things has been removed, or one of the more important obstacles, let's say, the technology, the barrier that you have to get over, technologically speaking, in order to use this. Of course, you still need a good story, and you still need to construct your story. And often people want to jump straight to the technology, when in actuality, you have to think about your story first and gather your resources. But that being said, if you have a story you'd like to tell, now the technological skills necessary to do so effectively online are much lower than they've ever been before. Now, we're not going to go over every single type because this is something I'm going to give you a resource for later. And also, to be honest, we've done this in past webinars, but just so that you notice, there's a whole bunch of different types here, from basic to story maps that look at sharing sort of information between maps. You have some like the map tour and this short list that excel at showing photos and linking them to locations. You have this crowdsource that we'll talk about in a bit that allows you to collect data. And then you have these types called Map Series, Map Journal, and Cascade, which really allow you to create a narrative and structure a story that people can pass through. So I just stop there quickly for any questions people may have, and I see a few have perhaps piled up. Is there anything outstanding I should deal with now, Mark or Molly?
No, it's been mostly the Zoom process so far. Questions?
Yeah. I think it's sort of standard in the beginning of webinars. So, okay, great.
We do now have a question.
Okay.
Liz has asked, she's curious about what made the Connecticut Forest Cover Map project so outstanding, i.e. what makes a great story map?
Yeah, well, the Esri folks judged it to be the best. That's a good question about what criteria they use. And I think, it's interesting because I'm coming at this from the technology side. But what makes a good story, I think, is a whole different discussion versus what technology allows you to tell the story you'd like to tell. So I've been really looking for resources to figure out different approaches of telling a good story. I've seen sort of Esri's posts about what they think is a good story map, but from my own standpoint, I would say it's obviously a story, a narrative that you can follow. It's a combination of effective graphics and visuals that are engaging. But also I would say something that's really important in mapping particularly is not to overdo it and to very much consider the amount of information you need to share with people to make your point, but what you can exclude so that your point shines through and people don't get distracted by overwhelming information. And I find that with a lot of maps, people just want to show all of their data, and then trying to sift through and figure out for the user which tiny points of this are the most important can be a little bit difficult. Okay, anything else before we go?
Yes, we got another question through the Q&A.
Okay.
I'm a story map novice, not sure how I might use it, but
Mhm.
can it be incorporated into an LMS such as Blackboard or Canvas?
That is a good question. I don't see why not. Each story map itself can be a standalone web page or it can be embedded. So I don't see why you, as long as you can embed a web page in those or have web content featured, which you should be able to, you should be able to use a story map. I haven't tried before, to be honest, but it's embeddable and it is a standalone web page, so you should be able to. It'll be interesting to see how that works or how well it works.
I think that's great, and I haven't seen any other questions come in, but feel free, folks, to use the Q&A or chat to ask any questions at any time.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to go over, these are 3 short examples, or examples of how Cooperative Extension in New Hampshire, at least, has been using maps over the past year or so. And so there's more than these that we've used, but I wanted to highlight these 3. One is how you tell your story using story maps with no maps at all. And it might seem counterintuitive, but story maps, some of the templates can be used perfectly fine with no maps. If you think back to that slide, there were a few of them that needed maps, but a bunch of them, it turns out that there are ways to create interactive websites that feature content. And the content could be a map. In fact, they work really well for maps. But those more narrative-focused story maps, you can have images, you can have videos, you can have embedded websites, you can have a lot of things be the focus of a specific section of the map, the story map, not just maps. So I'm going to show one example of that. In fact, last summer we did a webinar on how to tell your story with no maps at all. We focused on that, but I'll show you one example here. Another is really incorporating mobile data collection. And that is something that we've started to do in New Hampshire, and created a new version of a program, or a new take on a program called First Impressions. And I'll show you that. And then another one is focused, and this is a tiny bit cheating because this is a type, it's not exactly a story map, but it's very similar to a story map, but it's using ArcGIS Online. How do you collect data from the public and then be able to display it on a map online? So these are 3 specific examples I'm going to show, and these are tangible examples of how we've been using these at UNH Cooperative Extension. And part of my job in Cooperative Extension in New Hampshire, of course, and actually if you look on paper, the biggest part of my job is to try to help the public to use these resources. And especially over the past few years with my work with e-extension and through the innovation grants I've been involved with, and even inside of UNH Cooperative Extension, I've really been trying to figure out how can Extension use this best and how can we use this best. And it's taken a few years, but we now have some tangible examples. So here is a story map. This one happens to be the template called Cascade, which is something which is a bit fancier to do, and some people think it's a bit intimidating from even the user standpoint, but some other people really like the way that it allows you to create this interactive web page. And this is a story map, Cascade, that was made about the first 3 years of a new program that UNH Cooperative Extension is shepherding forward called the Stewardship Network New England. So they did this first 3 years report of their program in a more standard PDF, but then they used the story map templates to create this interactive report. And you can see as you scroll down the page, there are different graphic elements that appear for your map or your story map. So you can have images, you can have text, you can have text that floats up, that you can control the speed, and you can also control the format. And as you go forward, you can also, and let's see, that there are absolutely no maps at all as part of this story map. But again, it is using the interactive templates of story maps to allow people to tell their story in this specific case. Now, some people might say, well, you could do that with a PDF. And in fact, they did it with a PDF. But they also found that this one was more interactive, perhaps more engaging in some ways. And also, to be honest, was able to be updated over time, since this is a web page which you could go ahead and edit. Now, one thing I will also mention is that, and I just put it out there, which I always say, of course, the restriction of any online program like Story Maps is that you have to have internet access to use them. And sometimes people, maybe it goes without saying, but that is one limitation of using Story Maps. On the other hand, having that connection to the internet allows you to have perhaps a more immersive way to explore similar information that you might provide in a more standard pamphlet or brochure. There's not a single map in this entire story map, but you could still use the story map template to produce this. Now, you might say, well, that's just a web page. I could make that in different ways. And you're right, it is just a web page. Having done a bit of web design myself, I will tell you that making a website that looks like this is not trivial, even if you're using templates and things like WordPress or other platforms. So it could actually be that the easiest way to make a website that looks like this, even if you have no maps at all, is to use story maps through ArcGIS Online. Now, this is one of those types, as I said, using story maps to tell your story, even if your story doesn't happen to feature any maps at all. Another type of story map that we've been using is something called the map series. And this is, again, a series of maps or pieces of content that you can present in a specific order. And this happens to also incorporate data that were collected with mobile mapping. The mobile mapping is used through your smartphone. It's incorporated through ArcGIS Online. And this is a different take on this First Impressions program, which was the First Impressions program existed long before Cooperative Extension New Hampshire started using it. But we've adapted it to use it using technology, using mobile mapping, and using story maps to share information. So the idea are folks go out to different communities and sort of have a secret shopper situation where people from two different communities swap, communities that are likely not to encounter one another. As folks from Somersworth, for example, might go to another community that's an hour away or 2 hours away, and people from that community would come to Somersworth. And as they walk the streets, they're using their mobile device to record pieces of information, their first impressions of the town. So that's done, and then that data is fed straight into ArcGIS Online right from the mobile device, and then is shared with this story map. And as you can see in the story map, there's 4 different tabs. One is all points, one are assets, one are opportunities, and another is a combination of what are the greatest assets which also present an opportunity. So this is 4 different maps shown in one story map. And again, instead of having all these be different layers that you'd have to go and turn on and off, it allows you to view these perhaps or structure the information for people to explore in a more narrative way. And also, as you notice, as you click on these different maps, they stay in the same part of the town. And for each of these assets that were found, you can click and you can get information that was collected and also have access to different things, for example, as a picture that was taken of that asset. So this is using a combination of mobile mapping through ArcGIS Online and then story maps to share the information with that community. And as you might imagine, you could use this and send this out to the whole community through the web. You could also use it at the meeting itself with the community for a presentation, just by using ArcGIS Online and the story map itself, or I guess, you could use this at the meeting and then send people home with this link so they could explore it after the meeting to get even further information. And then go ahead. Any questions on either of those two?
Yeah, Shane, we've got a few questions that have come in.
Okay.
So first off, Daryl asked, have you run into issues with requirements to make story maps accessible to those with disabilities?
Oh, yes. In fact, I gave a presentation to, I've been working with some folks from the University of Maine Cooperative Extension to try to get Maine up and running with this. And that technology, that question was asked specifically. and one of their head web people for the whole university was at the training, and he went back and he followed up with it. And I'd be happy to share the information, general information with people, but they do have, Esri has a specific web page that deals with that question. He looked over it. He also got in touch and got more information from them. And he, at the end of his exploration, said that he felt that what Esri had done and their implementation and their, basically that it met the requirements that the University of Maine Cooperative Extension and University of Maine would be comfortable saying that it met the requirements necessary for them to use it in their programming. So I can provide more specific details, but it was great to have one of the people at the university at the training that was very tuned to that and followed up with it immediately, I think the next day, and then relayed back that they felt very comfortable having them think that the Cooperative Extension should feel comfortable using them in their work.
That's fantastic, Shane. Maybe we can share it through the Learn page afterwards as one of the resources to share. So Eleanor asks, so do individuals load photos and stories themselves? And this was on the first mapless story. That's what she was asking about.
Do individuals, I guess. So everything that's in a story map has to be somewhere online. So I'm not exactly sure what is meant by that.
Okay, perhaps Eleanor can clarify in chat, and we'll come back to that question.
Okay.
So we have a couple more.
Sure.
Got a nice active group. So is there a way to edit the commentary being added through the mobile device prior to posting to the web?
Yes. So it depends on how you have it set up. There's various approaches that you can use, but there's various approaches that you could use that would allow you to make sure that information that was submitted was not directly posted without some sort of intervention.
Excellent.
So, and I think, yes, the idea that everything would magically show up without any person being able to approve it, there are ways to do that. Sometimes you have to reverse engineer it a bit, but there are ways to do that. For example, this map is not generated real time. This is something that maybe the data are pumped into the system real time, but then the folks from Cooperative Extension create this map very specifically to then share with the town. So it's not as if this map is automatically being generated where the town's sitting there watching it. Although they could potentially, for a variety of reasons, which I'm sure the person envisions who asked the question, that's probably not the best idea in most cases.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
Okay, Chris asks, what does the external facing component of this look like? Is it an app, or does someone else, like an admin, enter that information?
The actual, so it depends. The story maps themselves is just a template that you use. As somebody who has a login, and I maybe can do that at the end if there's enough time, you log into the system and you build the template. You use the template on the website to add the pieces of content yourself. So this really is a web page. And the web page you build, which turns out to be a story map, is using the story map templates, which are part of the story map website. So there's no specific standalone app that's external to this. All of it is on the web.
Okay, Chris has asked a clarifying question. I specifically mean the people feeding the first impressions data.
Oh, yes. So the people feeding the first impressions data, there are, as you might not be shocked, a variety of ways you can do that as well. This implementation of it is using something called Arc Catalog, or sorry, not Arc Catalog, Collector for ArcGIS. And that is just an app that people put on their phone. And yes, the person who configures what that information looks like is somebody, in fact, a woman, Casey Hancock, who works at UNH Cooperative Extension. So she configures the survey the way she would like it to look, and then they open up the survey on their phone using this app, and then that information is contributed directly into ArcGIS Online. Now, one of the things I'm interested in is trying to get more people doing that specific component of it. So a future webinar might be much more focused on just how do you do that and what are the various approaches to do that. But you don't have to create a brand new app for it. It's an app that exists. You just have to use ArcGIS Online and a variety of GIS approaches to create what the information is you're going to collect. But the folks on the phone just install this free app. They log in, and then the information is there for them to input.
Excellent. So Denise asks, can first impressions data be just a list of addresses and create a map with that?
Yeah, so well, first impressions is a very specific program, but yes, you could create a map in ArcGIS Online just with a list of addresses. Yep, you could.
Excellent.
So the way to get the information onto the map itself, and that's a different topic, but there's a variety of ways. One, you could have a list of addresses. Two, you could have GPS coordinates that you either got off a map and you put in a spreadsheet, or GPS coordinates that maybe you took off a GPS unit. Or you could have this direct integration with the mobile device as I described. All of those things can be used to put points on the map.
Wonderful. I want to make sure we circle back. Eleanor said that Chris's question earlier on got to hers, so so she's had her question answered. Gabrielle asks, is there any privacy issues with using story maps to, for instance, map the locations of fire victims, which is an issue in her counties, for internal program use?
Yeah, and of course, I think that the funny thing is that technology is often just a framework for doing something else. So that something else that you're doing, whatever privacy issues are part of that in the first place, the technology doesn't eliminate them, although in some cases, like with story maps or mapping using ArcGIS Online, it could help solve them. So there are ways within ArcGIS Online that you can have data that only people who have logins can see that the public can't. You can also even create multiple versions so that the people behind the scenes can see certain information and people in the public see different information. So if you had one of the paid accounts, there's lots of ways that you could create layers of privacy and collaborate internally, but at the same time prevent it from being seen by the public. So there are ways to do that. Yep.
Fabulous.
Okay.
Sirarsha asks, what if surveys are handouts, and how do we do the visualization and analyze the data and tell the data with ArcGIS?
Okay, well, I'm going to take this question and then keep moving forward, because this is actually a very interesting discussion that doesn't have to do specifically with what I hope to get through before the end of the webinar, but I will take that one and then move forward. Yeah, to get information from surveys, if you have a paper survey, and in the past, first impressions, and still in many places is done using a paper survey, all you really need is a way to get that data to be electronic in order to put it into ArcGIS Online. And the two things you need are, one, location, which, as we said, could be lat long, it could be street address, and another is a way to get the data from that paper survey into an electronic and organized format. So in an Excel spreadsheet or something along those lines. And as long as you have information that's organized in a database like Excel, although Excel isn't a database, it could be used to pretend that it is one, and a location, you could bring that information into the maps, definitely. Okay, so I'm gonna move forward and I'll have more questions in a bit. I just wanted to show the third example. And our most recent example, this one only went up about a month ago, of the use of this sort of data collection and display is this new site called New Hampshire Rabbit Reports, where we're trying to get citizen science information contributed about rabbits. And all you have to do to report your sighting is click on this report a sighting, and this form is launched. And this form, in some ways, is really no different than Qualtrics or SurveyMonkey, but when you put the information in, and you can see just briefly how you can structure the form, once you put that information in and click submit, that information goes directly into ArcGIS Online to be used in a map. And so here is a sightings map that's produced from those data in ArcGIS Online. And this went up very, very recently, so we're just beginning to get report sightings, and this was coordinated through another person, Cooperative Extension here in New Hampshire, Haley Andriozzi. And if you just click on this legend, you can see that what she's done is everyone comes in as unconfirmed, and then as she goes through and is able to identify they are these specific species of interest. She makes that change behind the scene, and then the dots change to be representative of those different species. And if you click on each of these points, you can see the information that was generated or that was brought in through that submission. So this is a little more on the mobile mapping side than the story map side, but it is, again, a way of using maps to collect data and also to be able to tell stories and share information. So go back to this. Didn't expect that many questions on that, but it's great. I mean, the idea that people are interested enough to ask that many questions, I think, is exciting. So, okay. Any other quick questions before I go through to this next section, which is a couple of the newer features that are out there that people may not be aware of?
Oh, this group has more questions.
Of course, that's not a bad thing at all.
No, not at all.
Water
This is awesome. How to tell the story or create maps for metro areas. Till now, we are telling the story with counties.
Yeah, well, and I think part of the reality behind a map and what you can do with the map, and some people don't really understand this as much until they try to do it, is that the power of your map is really based on whatever data you have access to. So if you're very focused on the county level, it's probably likely because that's the level you work at, but also it's likely it's because that's the level of information that you have. So I think when you start to get into more specific pieces or areas like a metro area, you may not be aware of the data that are out there, but depending on the metro area, they might have actually a lot of very, very specific GIS information that they either have in the town itself or that they might have provided to folks like Esri or other mapping companies so that their background maps in those areas are even more interesting and more detailed than you might imagine. So I think that the real trick is not, can you make a map of an area? You always can. The real question is, are the data that you're interested in available at a fine enough resolution that it makes sense to look at some of the patterns from a metro area versus a county area? Or, thought of another way, what data do you have that would allow you to answer or ask questions of a smaller area like a metro area as opposed to on the county level or across state boundaries? So when push comes to shove, it all comes back to what data are available. And if the data are available, can you get them? And then the question is, how do you start to analyze and look at them? But as far as the GIS is concerned, it doesn't care whether you're looking at the difference between countries or counties or states or towns or even your backyard and your neighbor's backyard. GIS doesn't care. It's just, do you have the data at that resolution? And with imagery, we're getting much better, right? We have a whole bunch of different types of products. It used to be that the smallest pixel you would get would be 3 meters across. And now there are towns that have 3-inch pixels collected from airplanes. And now we have unmanned autonomous systems flying around collecting data. So from that perspective, it's much better and easier to see. But the question always comes back to, what are you interested in seeing? And do you have access to that data at the resolution that you need in order to ask those questions? Okay.
Excellent. One last question so far.
Mm-hmm.
Becky asks, will you send us the links to all these sample maps or paste them into the Q&A?
Yes. I don't know the best way to do it because it's hard for me to do it while I'm typing along, but my thought was to go back to the Learn a page after the fact and then paste them in there.
I think that
was my thought.
Yeah, and I think that would be an excellent solution. And that way everyone will have a chance to get it.
Yeah, and they made some bit.lys to make them shorter, but I think having all the links in one place that are clickable is the best way to go.
Mm-hmm. And they can also watch the recordings again if they'd like.
Yep. Okay, great. So as far as new features go, there's always new types of approaches that are evolving and emerging. And I say, as a geospatial technology extension specialist, that is part of my job, is to try to look and track these. And then out of the sea of all of the possibilities, focus in on those that are likely the most useful for our target audience and extension. But pretty much everything I do for the public is also equally relevant here inside of Cooperative Extension. So I'm just going to use 3 specific examples of changes. Some of these, they've all in the past year or so, but some of them are more. One is more recent, and another one is actually a little tiny sneak preview of something that's going to happen in the next month or two. And so the three differences would be, one, that information, how do you collect and share photos easily? And this is something that is blindingly easy to do. To set up one of these maps takes probably about 10 minutes. Another is, when you're using a story map, are there little tricks that will let you get more interaction? And there's one feature that has evolved over time, and I think is often overlooked, which can make a certain type of story map even more interactive and powerful. And another one is a long-standing issue with this map tour. We've been hearing for years that there's going to be a new version and it's going to look different and work better. And I just saw a blog post recently where they said this is what the new version is going to look like, and it's supposed to either be out in December or early 2018. So I just wanted to give people a little sneak preview of that. I heard the head of story maps at Esri talk about it at a conference about a year ago, and saying how much the map tour, how much he didn't like the map tour and the way that it worked, and how a new version would be better and easier for people to use. And apparently they're finally about ready to release it. So those are the three different examples I'm going to show here quickly. So first, collecting photos from people. And I will say, I teach a crowdsourced mapping class, an online course, academic course through the University of New Hampshire on crowdsourced mapping. So part of what I'm doing, I'm really tuned to how do you get people to contribute information. And this from Esri, this type of story map called a crowdsourced story map, came out about a year ago. And it just is so much easier than almost any other way that I know of to get people to share information. And this is the map called This is New Hampshire, which is produced by the Department of Environmental Services in New Hampshire to try to get people to submit information about their experiences with nature. And this is how the map looks. Again, in order to set this up, it takes literally minutes for you to set this up. And the way that the map works, and they automatically do this, is as people submit pieces of or pictures and little chunks of text, it automatically puts them here in this nice grid that you can zoom through. When you click on one, it shows the picture and some basic information for that map. Also, as you zoom in and out here on the map, it automatically redraws the dots. And let me zoom in closer so you might be able to see this. The only pictures that are visible over here on the side are pictures that are showing up on the map currently. And the thing about this, which is, I think, really impressive and makes it extremely useful for extension work, is that when you click on this Submit Photo button, and by the way, this button can say whatever you want it to say, you are able to, oops, and it skipped right by it. You are able to let people, let me see, one more second here. It came up very quick and then went by it. Must be I already made this choice in the past. You can have people log in with ArcGIS Online if they have an account, log in with Facebook if they have an account, log in with Google Plus if they have an account, or you can have it just have guests be able to submit information. So this, in about 10 minutes, maybe 15 or 20 if you're unsure about this, you can set up a map like this and send out the link to people. People on the web, on their phone, can submit images with little bits of text, title and a description, without having an account at all. And basically on the phone, it looks pretty much the same as this, because these are all the story maps are responsive. So as you resize the screen, and let me, at my own peril, but might as well live on the edge here, should work, that when you make the screen smaller, this was simulating what it would look like on a phone, it does change the dimensions of your map or your story map automatically. So this is what that story map would look like on a phone. So here's your place where you can see the images. You can click on Home to get back to the beginning, Map to see the map, Gallery, and then Participate to submit your information. So the fact that you can do this on the web, on a mobile device, with very little configuration necessary, no technical skills necessary, and without having anybody even have an account, is remarkable. And it is relatively new. I haven't seen very many other approaches to this that are as easy and allow you to do this and display the information in such an effective and appealing way. So again, this could say whatever you want it to say. And this is the examples of story maps that you need the paid account to use. Pretty much underlying all of them is the ability to collect data. So out of all of the templates of story maps, this is one that you do have to have the paid account. As we'll mention at the end, pretty much every university likely already has an account. And from the extension folks I've talked to, when they go and ask for a login to it, they normally get it without a lot of issues. So this will be one that you have to have a paid account, but if you do, you could set up a map like this in literally minutes and then be able to have people submitting information. As mentioned in the past, you can also set it up. One of the check boxes is these pictures posts need to be approved before they show up on the map. So you probably a wise idea to do that. But this dynamic of one person have an account, create a map using a template, put it out there and let people on the web and on mobile devices submit photos and bits of information, I think is a pretty impressive advance. It's about a year-ish old, but from an extension standpoint, I think it is incredibly useful. All right, have any pictures or any questions come up about that one before I move on?
Not at this time.
Say 3, 2, 1. Okay. So moving on, this is a type of story map called the map journal. And this seems to be one that people really like for using with narrative stories. And this happens to be one from here in New Hampshire about this volunteer citizen science marine debris project I was involved with. And the way that this story map works is when you scroll down here, this side scrolls. So in the Cascade, the entire screen scrolls. In this case, only the side scrolls. But then when you get to the next page, it's as if you, or section, it's as if you flip the page. And then this content over here is updated. And as you can see, this content could be an image. We've seen maps. There could be videos. And I'll even scroll down. Most of these in this one happen to be images, but I'll go down here to where we have some maps. So here's a map of the Great Bay estuarine area. And just for this little dotted line here is below this is New Hampshire, and above this is Maine. Give you an idea of where it is. Of course, out here is the ocean. This just happens to be a map of the sections that different volunteers were assigned to go and map and look for debris as a first part of this cleanup process. But what I'd like you to notice is right over here, there's this link. And I love this picture, which was a picture that showed people using a whole bunch of different levels of mapping and technology. And if you imagine this, I always think of map journals as coffee table books where you have a big image. Usually in coffee table books, there's some sort of large predominant image and then some text. And in some books, or even National Geographic and magazines, you have these additional flaps that fold out. So having these links here, you can click and it changes what's visible on the right side of the screen. So it's almost as if for each panel or each section, you have the ability to display a whole bunch of different kinds of content. And I love this picture because this is a very official GIS map that I created ahead of time. We had just taught a whole bunch of people how to use mobile devices to do their maps. But here we are gathered around a table in a public library using highlights and Sharpies and markers to trace on the map for all these people to select and come to an understanding of where it is that they were going to do their mapping. And if you click back here, you get back to that original screen. So this one action, which in the story map journal you can do, allows you to have even more interactivity and show a lot more content and have a very different way to structure your story. So in addition to using it here, I did use it down here. So I had various things I wanted to show. Here is all of the information, all of the marine debris reports that we got from people. And as you can see, not everybody went where they said they would go, but we had 10 of 13 areas covered. And for here, each of these clicks shows you the basic type of information or the basic type of debris that was found there. But in order to show in a different way, I actually created 5 different maps here of plastic, wood, tires, and styrofoam and foam. And when you click on these links, what that does is it changes the map that's displayed over here on this side. So you can zoom in and see plastic, the wood, tires, and then styrofoam and foam. Of course, if it's little bits of styrofoam, it'd be everywhere, but these were big chunks of styrofoam. And as you zoom into these areas, these maps stay, oh, there's no tires there, stay in sync with each other. And if you click back, you go back to the original map. So this is a very powerful, these additions, and I think they changed the name. I think they're called journal actions. Used to be called main stage actions. But this is something I think that's overlooked. It's something that's new and it sort of evolved and emerged. You can also change differences. We didn't use it in this story map, but by clicking here, it could force you to scroll down to another section of the map. It allows the map to become much more interactive, and it allows you to display multiple types of content on one section. Now, we could have had all of those different types of debris on the map at once. Would have been a little messy. We could have had each section be a different map, but by having the ability to let you look through different types of data by clicking here, it allows you to structure it in such a way that people can explore the map, can explore information, but it keeps them contained inside of one section in order to do that. Out of all the story maps, the map journal is the only one that has that. And I think it is, when I've seen map journals and story maps done well, and that was one of the questions, what can they be done well? They make good use of this, but as I mentioned, not overuse of it. So if I had 20 different types of debris categories, I think it would start to get overwhelming. I think 3 or 4 of them here to be able to look through specifically, and we selected these because they were the ones of the most common types of debris. I think it makes this section a much more appealing and interactive area than if you weren't able to use these. So very important approach in Map Journal to use these story map. Again, I can't remember what they're called. It used to be called main stage actions, because this they considered the sidebar, and this they considered the main stage. Any questions about that?
Excellent. We've got a couple of questions. I think one is for the last kind of map. But Joseph asks, are photos uploaded for public viewing automatically, or can you make that can you make it that an administrator has to approve it?
Yes, you definitely can make it that an administrator has to approve it. And there's in the template there's a checkbox, which you either say yes, it has to be approved. The posts have to be approved before showing up, or no, they don't. So you definitely can do that.
Okay, and Becky asks, do you recommend putting instructions like click below for interactive features when making your story maps?
And I think that is a good question. I don't know. Yes, to say, I think it makes it much more likely that people will follow along what you intend them to follow along, or how you intend them to follow along. I debated where I should put this. Should I put it here? Should I put it up? Will people know to click on this? Or should I say in parentheses here, click below to see marine maps of debris by category? I think it's an interesting balance of having it maybe look a certain way or have enough information for people to follow. I think that would be an interesting usability study, even to sit and watch people use the map that you created. But I think at times it is very important to include those instructions. How to do it in a way that's useful, that will be seen without it being overly distracting, I think is a trick. And I don't know. I'll have to sit down and watch. Do people know to click here? Or should I say down right below here, click the words below to see debris, different types of debris? Maybe that's even a better way to put it. It's a good point.
Maybe in
I
version
will
2.0.
guarantee that no matter, version 2.0. I do guarantee that no matter how well you think you've thought things through, then somebody will always find a way to not follow the path that you set out. But I think by putting instructions in the right place, you have your highest chance of people following through with the map in the way that you expect them or hope that they will follow through. Definitely. Good point.
So it doesn't look like we have any more questions pending at this moment, but folks, feel free to ask and we'll pause to take them.
Sure. And then the other type is just to say that this is a new feature, and this is exciting to me because A, I've been hearing about it for a while, and B, I do see the limitations of this type of map. in the way that it's evolved. The very first story map that Esri ever created, the template was this one called the Map Tour. And this is a very specific type of story map where you have information here with different pictures and different locations. And you want people to be able to browse those pictures and experience their information, both by clicking here as a point on the map. You can scroll around this map down below. You can also advance through the pictures. And of course, you see, in addition to pictures, you can also put videos here. You want people to really explore or take a tour of a specific location. And so you have your pictures, your locations, and you have the ability to have text here that has some description and also a name. And creating these is relatively easy as long as you have the location information for your pictures, which is the somewhat tricky part. If you have smartphones, you can very easily set them up to do this. If not, you're going to have to find another way to anchor the picture. But this was the very first version of the story map, and we've been hearing for years that a new one would be coming soon. Well, it turns out that they released their first preview of a new one, and this is the new version that they've been working on. Of course, they just released this not that long ago. We had a little bit of a Halloween theme earlier. This is the 13 Spooky Halloween Haunts. They said this one was either coming out in December or early 2018. And you can see they've talked about what we just mentioned. How do you get people to start? They have this big button down here that says take the tour for you to click, which maybe not coincidentally looks like the beginning of the crowdsource map too. And then this is what the new version of the map tour, or pretty close to the new version, will look like. One of the things that I heard them talk about a lot in the presentation was that to them, the picture should dominate more. It should be more interest. And also the fact that the text and the name of the picture in this old one was on top of the picture, sort of reduced the amount of emphasis on the picture, that you could always turn this down to look at it and put it back up, but that they thought that the picture should stand alone and then have the text and the information not be overwhelming or overlapping the picture. This still works very similarly, that you can click through the different pictures and it zooms around from location to location. It does zoom in maybe a little more slick way than the previous version does. And of course, you can also navigate the map here by zooming in and out, scrolling around to location, and then clicking on that point to access that information. This probably also works much better on a mobile device. This on a mobile device is a little more difficult to use. I will say this is one of the few story maps that you can enable it to know your location on the ground. So you could be at Delaware State University with this on your phone and click this little button up here, which is show me where I am. And the point, as long as your phone allows that information to be passed, your point on the map will appear. So you could be using this tour at the campus, walking around and see where you are in the ground. This, I imagine, will also have that same functionality, but in maybe a more modern design that also probably works better on mobile devices. I don't know how much control you're going to have over this map, how big it is. This is all very new, but it shows you this is the type of thing that Esri does. In addition to having new versions that come out, or new types of templates, they also seek to refine the templates to work, maybe be a bit more appealing or look more like other websites, but also to function better on different types of devices over time. And I thought this was wonderfully appropriate for today, but this is, to be honest, it's the only example that I've ever seen public of what this will look like in the near future. My understanding from what they said, at least at the conference last year, is that if you have this version, you should be able to convert them to this. That at least is what they said at the conference.
So we have a couple of questions, and we're at the 1:55 mark, at least.
Oh yes.
Sorry, locally.
Yep.
I'm in Central Time, folks.
Yeah.
So in the map tour, are these photos manually uploaded, or is it using Google Maps pics?
There's a variety of ways you can host the photos. So you could manually upload them one at a time. You can have them hosted. I think one of Google's services works. If it's Picasa or Google Photos or Pics, I'm not sure. I'm not a Google user with photos, so I'm not 100% familiar, but I do know that they have various options. Another option is Flickr. And Esri has created an option where they allow you to upload the pictures directly to their servers to be featured in the maps. Also, if you happen to have a publicly available link to a picture, so if it's somewhere in a server that you can get the URL from, you can add that as well. By far the best way is to have geo-referenced pictures, so pictures they know where their location is on some cloud service, whether it's Flickr or Google Photos or something, because if you bring them into this map, it'll just throw their pictures on the map, plop the points on the ground, and it's fairly easy to create the map from there. You also can add them one at a time, but as you might imagine, the more pictures you have, the more difficult that gets. So there's a decent amount of options. I will tell you the hardest part with this map is figuring out the option that works the best for you and making sure the security settings, for example, in Google Pics or whatever it is, or Flickr, allows the location to be passed and that your picture's in a public folder. That's most of the battle, is getting that set up. Because creating the map, once you have the pictures in the right location and set up correctly, making the map is fairly easy.
Excellent. And it was also asked, and this is actually a couple maps back, so not the old version of this, but that one. Would you click on the map again? Do all 4 categories show up? So I'm hoping that they see that.
And then this back brings you back to that first map.
Sure. And hopefully that answered. And let's see, and Eleanor asks, could you have more than one picture for each, such as 2 views? And I'm wondering which map she is meaning.
I'm guessing she
the
means
latest one.
For this one.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it that you can do that. I have not seen that. But then again, this is a new version, so maybe. I do know back here you're not able. I've never seen it. Each picture has a point on the ground. That's a good question, though, to see if there's a way that you can advance through multiple pictures. I don't think that's the way they envisioned it, but that's the type of thing I might tweet at the Story Maps team. They have actually, one of the uses of Twitter I found to actually be very useful is getting in touch with Esri technical support. And I knew the Story Maps team was a whole separate group of people that work specifically on this, so they've been really responsive. And I think it's just at Esri Story Maps for Twitter folks, but I'm interested in that. I'm going to go ahead and ask and try to find out.
And I just wanted to point out to folks, I just put some links into the chat for an end of session evaluation while Shane is wrapping up, as well as links to the next Story Maps session, which I hope you all attend, and also 2 more Impact Collaborative sessions on the new Impact Collaborative for food systems and piloting your ideas for digital technology. So we've got a lot of great sessions coming that I hope you'll be a part of.
Great, thanks. 2 very last minute things I wanted to mention is I did talk about the fact that you can create, that you could use a lot of story maps with just the public account, which is free for anybody to use. If you have a university-based account, it gives you privacy, the ability to do analysis, and a mobile mapping. So since I think most of the people on this call are extension-based or university-based, go and ask, do I have an ArcGIS online account? Can I get one? If not, you can just go create a free public account and start doing a lot of the story mapping, just not the data collection part of it. And the other thing is I've been working for a while with other folks in our community of geospatial technologies through Extension to create a website which is hopefully helping folks understand how to use maps better and having links to examples of maps that are being used by folks in Extension and Outreach. And it's there's actually an S in that. I forgot to put the S, but it doesn't matter. It's EX for Extension, exgeospatial.org. And if you're a person who does social media, all of our handles and our locations are all EX Geospatial, but you can see that there. And then the last thing is that, and Molly beat me to the punch, but last thing is this is my contact information, which feel free to reach out to me in any of those ways. And then on November 20th, we're having another story map focused webinar, and that one is really talking about tips and tricks that allow you to make your story map be even more useful and more engaging, and maybe some of the things to avoid. And these have been gleaned from my experience and experience of other Extension folks who have been using story maps in their work.
Thank you so much, Shane. I'm putting the end of session evaluation in again, just in case, but we've got some more questions.
Sure.
If you can stand for a minute or
I'm
two.
fine. Yeah.
What kind of account did you say? ArcGIS?
ARC, yes, ARC, ARC, GIS online. I'll put this up. And the one thing about this slide is if you go to, it's arcgis.com is Esri's, one of the places you can find this. If you click on that try ArcGIS button, it will sign you up for a 60-day free trial of their paid service. If you click on the sign in button in the upper right, it will bring you to the page below where it says need an ArcGIS public account, create a public account, and you can get one for free. Now the limited usage and capabilities are that you can't control privacy to a high degree. You can't do spatial analysis and you can't do mobile mapping. But in all of the story map workshops we teach, the first thing I have everybody do is create a story map or an ArcGIS online account. And with the free public one, we're able to do everything that we need to do for that day. So yes, ArcGIS online is the underlying technology that runs behind Story Map. So your ArcGIS online account is also a login for Story Maps.
Wonderful. So one more question here. Let's see. Oh, it's actually more of a comment. Frank shares, Gabriel, we use as a crime map where the exact location is not used. The location is moved to the nearest crossroads or street intersection for the exact reason you state. So
yes, that is a great, I'm glad somebody came up with an example of that. It is really important to consider when you're sharing, as you can share data more easily, what sort of data should you share and how should you not? And what are ways to sort of reduce that resolution? I'd be interested to know how they do that. Is that something they do manually, or is that something they've come up with an automated process for? But that's great. The nearest intersection does reduce that, gives you still that level of data that's useful, probably for most cases, but reduces the concerns about privacy. That's great. I hadn't heard that approach before. I like that.
So Frank shared it's a manual process.
Oh, okay.
So no, and maybe some great minds will come up with an automated one in the future. So, well, we've run over just a little bit, but wow, I want to thank you so much, Shane, for a fabulous session. And I'm looking forward to your next session as well. And thank you everyone for joining us today.
Yes, great. Well, thank you for having me. Well, I've never gotten that many questions in a webinar, so it's good. Shows there's a lot of interest and some wheels churning about ways in which people could possibly use this. So it's exciting to hear.
And as Molly shared, folks, a link to the recording will be on the Learn event within a few days, so feel free to share that with colleagues or friends who might not have been able to join us. All righty. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you again next time.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.